Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today. In this presentation, I will be walking you through the interactive loan portfolio dashboard that I have developed using the raw data from the bank loans that was provided. Um, the raw data I use this dashboard to analyze more than 19,000 loan applications. My goal with this dashboard is to show how the goal with this video is to show how the dashboard was built, the logic behind some of the calculations that I made, the insights it reveals about the bank loans that were made, and most importantly, what recommendations the financial institution can take away from the provided analysis. So I will first begin with an overview of the dashboard structure and its key metrics. Then I will continue by describing the data cleaning and preparation process and walking through each visualization in detail, explaining what it shows and why it matters. After that, I will summarize the main insights that emerged from the data, and then finally, I will spend a good amount of time on the recommendations based off the findings from the dashboard, as this is an area where we can translate the analysis into future action. So to provide an overview of the dashboard, I'm going to start with a high-level overview of the dashboard. At the top of the dashboard, we begin with the summary performance of the metrics. Here we have the total applicants, the total loan amount, total payments received, the average interest rate, and the average DTI. These metrics are there to give the user or the shareholder a quick sense of the scale and the quality of the loan environment. Directly below that, we have our slicers where we can filter based off the gender, the race, the address state, the loan status, the loan quality, so a bad loan versus a good loan, and then the company type. And then under that, we have a pie chart which displays simply just bad loans versus good loans, how many we have based on the data provided. Um, it also includes charts for monthly loan applications, uh, monthly payments, the average interest rate by month as seen here, and the average DTI by month, um, which is also included in the same one. These are included in the dashboard to help us understand the seasonality and when the lending activities tend to peak or dip throughout the year. The lower portion of the dashboard shifts towards the borrower demographics. I included breakdowns by company type, gender, race, home ownership status, and these visuals are included to help ensure that the lending practices are equitable and there's no biases being made against specific groups, and that again that no demographic category is disproportionately contributing to poor loan performance. And then again, as I mentioned, we have the slicers at the top. Um, so yeah. But before I go into detail on each of the visualizations, I want to explore some of the preparation that went into creating these visuals. So the dataset was provided. The dataset does provide 19,323 loan records to be exact. Before the analysis, there was a little bit of cleaning that had to occur. One of the biggest issues I ran into was with the date fields, such as the issue date and the last credit pull date, where they were stored as text rather than actual date values that were being recognized by Excel. So to fix this, I use Excel's text to column, which if you go under data and then you go to text to column here, I selected the delimited. I unchecked the tab for the date column specifically, and then I went here to date and set them as a day, month, year format, and then I press finish. So that's how I fixed those dates that were not being stored properly in the Excel sheet. So once the system was able to recognize these values as dates, I was able to extract the month and the year using formulas, enabling me as the dashboard builder to visualize data by month, as you can see here in this column where I'm looking at the issue month which is being extracted from the issue date. Um, but originally this raw data, I converted the entire data set into an Excel table named raw data. Converting the data into a structured table was necessary for me to be able to accurately build pivot tables. Um, I also created as I mentioned before, I created a calculated column here for the month. And then most importantly, the column that I created was the loan quality column. So if I come over here, and as you can see here in the text box, that was the formula that I used to determine the loan quality. Um, the logic that I use specifically for the loan quality categorization, I tried my best to go based off of a real world approach. So if the loan was already labeled as fully paid, it was automatically considered a good loan. If the loan was considered charged off or default, it was automatically categorized as a bad loan. However, if the loan was quote unquote current, then I evaluated it based off of its progress towards being repaid, the borrower's credit score, and the DTI. The total payment had to be at least the loan amount. The credit score had to be at least 580 or higher, and the DTI had to be below 50% in order for the current loan to be considered a good loan. Um, this layer logic does mirror what tends to happen in the credit industry and does give us a more accurate classification than simply comparing total payments to the loan amount. And then finally, after all of that, before I started building the dashboard or building the pivot tables that were being used to create pivot charts for the dashboard, I did design a layout background inside of PowerPoint. As seen here, this was a lot easier than trying to build the background from scratch in Excel, as you have all the cells and everything that kind of interfere with the user's ability to create it. So I created it here in PowerPoint first, and then copied that background and pasted it into my dashboard sheet. And then from there, so after the preparing the data and cleaning it up a little bit, I did create a series of pivot tables. So if I go to my pivot table sheet here, as you can see, these are all of the pivot tables that are driving the dashboards that we're seeing here. So I created all the pivot tables based off of the recommendations provided. And then once I created the pivot tables, then I went on each one and inserted a pivot chart. As you can see here, I have a bunch of pivot charts buried on top of one another, and these pivot charts were copied and then pasted into the dashboard. But to kind of go a little bit further, each pivot table does serve a specific purpose, such as calculating monthly applicants, as we can see here. Monthly, the total payments made by month. We have our average interest rate by different demographics, such as the company type, gender, and race. We have average interest rates and average DTI by month here. I have my pivot table, which shows us the amount of bad loans versus good loans. I have a pivot table which shows us the loan applicant type. And then this is broken down by company type. And as we can see, so the amount of individual loan types that were made within the private sector versus the public sector versus those that are self-employed. Then I have another pivot table which is broken down by race and then by property ownership type or home ownership type. So you can see here we have the amount of Asians that have a mortgage or something other than a mortgage, or they own, or they rent. And that goes for all the other races that were included as well. Then we have another series of pivot tables down here at the bottom, such as bad loans and good loans, broken down by the average annual income. And then same thing, we have the average DTI by company type, average credit score by gender. We have the sum of total payments made by race, and then we have the number of loans, the number of applicants by loan status, and then by gender. Um, I wanted to make it easier on myself. I did place all of the pivot tables all on one sheet, um, to avoid having to keep up with multiple sheets per pivot table. As you can see, it is a lot of different pivot tables. And then I did ensure by right clicking on all of the slicers and then going to report connections that all of the slicers are connected to all of the pivot tables that I created. So as you can see here, I ended up creating about 16 pivot tables. So I did do that for each of these, going through the same step of doing the report connections. So now going into providing a detailed understanding of what the dashboard is telling us. The summary metrics at the top quickly show the magnitude of the loan portfolio. Over 529 million dollars have been made in have been lended has been lended, and the borrowers have repaid over 245 million, and the average interest rate does end up falling at around 12%, a little just slightly over 12%. And these aggregates help us, or helps the users, specifically those in leadership roles, get a good feel for where the loan portfolio is currently at. The donut chart is arguably one of the more critical visuals, as it shows that 70% of the portfolio does consist of bad loans. Since the classification logic is designed to reflect a real world standard, this is not just a theoretical calculation, it represents actual underperformance in the loan portfolio. So this instantly should grab the stakeholders' attention and raise some awareness, and set off some alarms as to some of the business processes or operations or some of the lending methods that need to be reevaluated. Next, we have the monthly application volume, which shows that it is highly dependent on the season or the time of year that we are in. So applications based off the visualization tend to spike dramatically in the fall months of October and November, which suggests that peak borrower demand occurs during the fourth quarter. Monthly payments tend to follow the same pattern, showing that the portfolio collection also peaks late in the year. Then next, what we have is the interest rate by month, which is shown in the line graph here by this darker line at the bottom. This shows that there is some stability across the different months, which suggests that the underwriting criteria or the pricing model has remained fairly consistent. Also, we can see the average DTI by month. The DTI ratios also remain stable, averaging at around 0.17 or 17%, which is, from my understanding, generally acceptable. However, there are occasional spikes, as you can see here at the bottom, and then it spiking up and down. That should be observed more closely, as DTI is one of the stronger predictors of the borrower's ability to repay the loan. And then next we have, again, as I was discussing when we were going through the pivot tables, we have the number of applicants by the application type and the company type. This is good to let us know. So it seems pretty consistent across both. There isn't a disparity across applicant types that are coming in as individuals or joints, which lets us know that it is safe for us to lend to both. You would expect that individuals more than likely have less annual income or less of an ability than the joint applicant types to be able to repay, but based off the visual, that is not what we're seeing here. Um, and then at the bottom, we have the demographic visuals, which are it's intended to help us ensure that the practices of the financial institution are in compliance with fair lending laws. Loan performance seems to be relatively equitable across the different demographic categories. Um, though, as we can see here, so we have a breakdown of race by property type. We have the average DTI by the company type, and then we have the sum of total payments made already back by race. As we can see here, it seems that the Hispanic race has a much lower sum of total payment compared to other ethnic groups. So this is something for the bank to be able to look into and maybe make sure that that when they're looking at the demographics of potential of applicants, that they're paying a little bit more closer attention to race, and instead of avoiding lending to that specific ethnicity or races that have a tendency not to pay back their loans as quickly as other races, that they provide the resources that would be beneficial to that race, and making sure that they have the financial literacy to understand the situation that they're getting themselves into, which is something that we'll talk about a little bit more once we get into the recommendations. Um, just some quick key insights and observations. So there is a very high proportion of loans that are categorized as bad loans. There are seasonal spikes that tend to increase by a lot once we hit the fourth quarter of the fiscal year. The DTI and the interest rates do remain stable, suggesting that the underwriting is consistent, but there will be some improvements that I suggest later on. Demographic patterns appear mostly equitable, but certain groups do contribute disproportionately to loan volumes, and the credit scores cluster around the mid 600s, indicating that there is a moderate risk of within the applicant pool, as a 600 credit score isn't terrible, but it's also not very promising for those that are making the loan. So based off of the data and as I explored it, um, there are uh, an extensive amount and detailed recommendations that I want to make. The first of them being strengthening underwriting standards and borrower verifications. So, given the high number of defaults and charge-offs, the organization would benefit from reevaluating its underwriting processes. Even though there is a stable DTI and interest rates, current criteria for lending may be a little bit too lenient. Some of the actions that could be taken in this sense would be increasing minimum credit score thresholds to 600, somewhere around 600 to 620 for unsecured loans. They should also require additional documents for applicants that are self-employed, like business, bank statements, and tax returns. They should search and try to leverage third-party verification tools for income validation, of course, without breaching the privacy of the applicant, but it is best that the financial institution has all the information that they need to know that they can trust the person that they're lending the money to. And then also implement a secondary review queue for borderline applicants. Second recommendation is implementing a tiered risk-based pricing model. Um, The interest rates are currently too uniform across the applicant risk categories. Risk based pricing will help manage the financial institution's exposure to defaults. So, what that would look like would be creating a multi tier pricing model, something going along the lines of prime, near prime, subprime, or deep subprime. They should adjust pricing based on repayment behavior for renewal loans. Um, so if I am a borrower and I'm applying for a renewal on my loan and I've shown that I can be trusted as a borrower by consistently making my payments on time, maybe even making more than what is the minimum required payment, um, showing that I can be trusted as a borrower. Um, they should also provide, and going off of that, they should also provide discounts to strong performers after a year of on-time payments. Um, this helps to retain consumers, or borrowers in this sense, and it does help create a more healthy environment for the financial institution in terms of the demographics and the money that they're lending to. Um, Increase rates for high risk categories to better match expected losses. The third recommendation would be developing a predictive early warning system. Many of the quote unquote current loans may still be at risk of a default or charge off. It would be best to implement or create an internal predictive monitoring system that can identify the borrowers that are in the early stages of being a at risk. Um, this will look like building a repayment health score using payment timing, um, amortization progress, DTI, and credit score changes. Um, Also, it's the making sure that the system is capable of automatically flagging loans with low early repayment activity, creating a borrower outreach program for at-risk individuals, and establishing a loan retention team that specializes in the early stages of preventing loans from being defaulted or charged off. The fourth recommendation would be optimizing operational capacity during the high volume months, which we are looking at more specifically in the fall, starting off maybe a little bit mid September, but definitely having the right amount of staff in the fall so that we take pressure off of other staff and can make better decisions that aren't being rushed or hastily made. So again, increasing staff or extended underwriting hours during the fourth quarter of the fiscal year, um, automating document processing, um, using whatever available advanced tools, enhancing fraud detection protocols during peak periods, and since there is an influx of applicants that are coming in, it is more likely that certain aspects of the application are missed. So having the additional staff and a detection protocol that is refined would help during this influx. Um, and then having a team or a few people that are experts in monitoring underwriting error rates in the fourth quarter for seeking opportunities to improve their processes. The fifth recommendation would be strengthening fair lending monitoring. So again, the demographic analysis appears to be balanced, but more advanced fairness checks are needed for compliance, as we saw with the Hispanic group. That is well behind some of the other ethnicities in the total payments that have been made back on their loans. Um, there should be a conduction of quarterly fairness audits across the different demographic groups, whether that's based on um, home ownership type, ethnicity, gender, company type, and the other demographics that are included. Validate automated underwriting tools to ensure that there is no disparate impact. Create fairness dashboards tracking approval similar to the dashboard as we see here, um, that is capable of tracking approval rates and the pricing differences across the groups to make sure that there isn't one group that is getting better pricing compared to another group. And then maintaining comprehensive audit trails that document underwriting decisions. So making sure in a world that is littered with data that we are keeping track of every single metric, factor, value that could possibly be tracked, because in one way or another it can be proven to be beneficial and very valuable to in um, making sure that we achieve these recommendations. Um, Another recommendation would be to expand product flexibility and create more tailored loan options. Um, for example, high risk borrowers may be better served with modified loan products, such as offering secure loans or smaller loan limits for the high risk borrowers, introducing interest rate reductions for consistent repayment. So, going back to that idea of providing incentives, provide financial literacy programs and credit building programs. So a lot of these groups, depending on the area and a lot of other factors, could be financially illiterate. So then it, since the bank is or financial institution is not taking the time to make sure that the applicant is fully understanding what it is that they're asking and what it is that they're getting themselves into, perhaps providing financial literacy to applicants, um, based off of certain characteristics and demographics and based on applications and what it is that they're asking for, we could possibly make them think twice about asking for a loan, before they get themselves and the bank into a situation to where the bank has to charge off for default or the borrower is in unnecessary debt. We also want to encourage automatic payments to reduce delinquency. This is something that probably could scare off a lot of people as they might not, depending on their financial situation, might not want to commit to an automatic payment. But it could be beneficial in the end because it does make them possibly be more responsible with their money and their spending, knowing that they have a payment that's going to be automatically taken out on a monthly basis. Um, and the last recommendation is with the current advancements in technology and more specifically in data science, integrating advanced analytics and machine learning. Advanced analytics can improve prediction accuracy and decision making, um, building machine learning models to forecast default risk, conduct cluster analysis to identify the personas of borrowers, use profitability modeling to refine pricing and loan terms, so that they don't end up being outdated and can adapt to economic events or financial situations of the borrower, and implement decision engines to automate underwriting with consistency. So those are my recommendations based off of the findings from the dashboard. Um, and some of the technical aspects and challenges. So technical challenges really just included cleaning the messy date formats. I did struggle at first because I am usually used to just changing the format type, and that usually fixes the problem. But luckily, after a little bit of research, I was able to find out that text to columns does work in this specific case, as I'm used to just using text to column to separate a single value within a cell into different columns based off of a delimiter. So that was something that I learned. Designing the dashboard background in PowerPoint. I'm used to working with Power BI in my own professional job, so I'm used to just being able to build a background, especially because in my job, since we're consistently developing Power BI dashboards, we have a template that we follow. It didn't take me long. It was just a little tedious. Um, Creating the structure tables for the dynamic pivot tables, um, and then managing the multiple pivot charts and slicers. Like I said, I made the decision to keep everything all on one page because it made it easier on myself. That was just a personal preference, but having to move all of the visualizations that I was making into a spot so that I can keep track of the pivot tables and everything. Um, and then ensuring that each visual aligned with the background required. Precise formatting. Um, that was a little difficult in that there was a lot of visualizations that were required to be included on the dashboard. Um, Technically, I mean, I could have maybe added a second page to the dashboard, as this is something that is a usual practice in my job. When we have a lot of different visualizations and we want to give the stakeholders a lot more what we refer to as real estate on the page to be able to see everything. But I still think it looks good. I think it's well organized and it's clear as to what it's showing. And the coloring and the scheme is consistent. Um, but that was just my experience with building it. So in closing, the dashboard does provide a comprehensive, interactive, and actionable view of the loan portfolio, and highlights significant risk of exposure, but also reveals clear pathways for improvement. Um, Through improvements in the underwriting process, targeted product strategies, planning for improvements in operations, and the possibility of using advanced analytics, the financial institution can see drastic changes in their portfolio performance as it is needed based off of the count of what is being considered a bad loan versus what is being considered a good loan, and considering that the portfolio consists of 70% of their loans being considered bad, um, these changes are very well much needed. Thank you.